Now in the last session, we were applying observational science in biology, particularly using dogs, to show that those changes that we see in dogs, and I said they weren't uphill changes, they're really downhill changes, and we're going to really look at that in detail here. Those changes, some people call evolution, but then they use the same word evolution for molecules to man. Now when most people think of the word evolution, they're really thinking molecules to man. But at the same time, students in the secular education system are usually taught that evolution is the term you use when you're talking about changes in animals, then evolution is the term you use when you're talking about molecules to man. So we need to explain those things as we did in the last session. So the changes that we see in dogs is not evolution in the molecules to man sense, it's just changes within the gene pool of dogs. And it actually goes against the idea of molecules to man evolution. Now, we ended up by talking about the fact that all dogs were one kind. Even the secular scientists agree with that because all dogs are related. And that two dogs came off Noah's Ark and they had offspring, and you'd build up the population of dogs again after the flood, and we'll end up with this large population of dogs, but they're not going to all stay together. They're not going to all stay together. The gene pool will eventually split up as dogs move off in different directions. And of course we believe that at the end of the flood, for a few hundred years, and associated with the flood, as a result of the flood, there was an ice age that lowered ocean levels, and so would enable dogs and other creatures as well to migrate over land bridges all over the earth. And then as the ice age ends, basically the ice melts and then the land bridges disappear and so on. So this all plays into all of that as well, but we're not dealing with that in detail in this session. Now, what happens as that population of dogs splits up? You get different combinations of genes that move in different directions. Now let me give you an example to help us understand what happens here in this process of natural selection adaptation. We're going to talk about the two dogs that were on Noah's Ark. So have a look at these two dogs, great looking dogs. I'm sure everyone would want a dog like this, wouldn't they? Of course, how do we know the dogs on Noah's Ark look like that? We don't know, because that's in the past and that's a limitation of observable science. See, we're applying all this. But anyway, here we have two dogs, and in dogs you can have genes for long hair and short hair. This gene here is for short hair, this gene here is for long hair. See all the long hair coming off the gene? Now that's just a pictorial representation of this to help us understand it, okay? In genetics, sometimes, instead of being dominant recessive, as I said, it's always much more complicated than what I give you here. I'm just giving you the big picture. But in genetics, we can have instances where one gene will interact with another gene. So when long hair gene and short hair gene interact together, instead of one being dominant, one recessive, they actually produce a medium effect. And so the median effect here is that you have basically medium hair-length dogs. Now, imagine this. You get two dogs getting off Noah's Ark, and they have a gene for short hair and long hair each. And then they have offspring that inherit the short-haired gene from the male, short-haired gene from the female, and this one gets two short-haired genes, which means it's going to be short-haired as a dog, correct? Okay. Then we know that you could get those that get a gene for short hair and a gene for long hair from each, and in fact there's two possible combinations here, but they each have a short hair gene and a long hair gene, which means they're going to be in the middle, just like the ones on Noah's Ark. And then the dog that inherits both genes for long hair is going to be a long-haired dog. You understand that? Okay. Now imagine that with all these dogs here, those that have any gene for short hair at all die out of the population for some reason. They're all gone. And you're only left with dogs that have genes for long hair. Now, if dogs with genes for long hair mate with another dog with genes for long hair, you're only going to get offspring that all have what? Long hair. And on their own, could they ever produce dogs with short hair again? Or medium hair length again? No, they couldn't, because you've lost the information for short hair. You see that? Now, apply that through the process of natural selection. Here we have dogs that move towards a cold climate. Those that have the right combination of genes for long hair survive better than those for short hair. Those for short hair might die out before they're old enough to reproduce or something like that, and they get eliminated from the particular population. And so over time, you'll end up with a species of long-haired dog, okay? The opposite in a hot climate, where those with long hair maybe die of overheating or something or other, whatever, but over time you get a species of short-haired dog through all sorts of other environmental factors, the process of what we call natural selection, adaptation. There are genetic factors as well. It all gets very, very complicated. But over a period of time, you sort out the genes in the dog population, and so you can end up with all these different species of dogs and different varieties of dogs, but they're still 100% dogs. And even though some of them might not even interbreed anymore because they become so isolated from each other, and some of them, because they've lost certain information, can't interbreed. There's all sorts of reasons why they can't, and they can even be classed as different species, but they all go back to the original dog stock, so they're still all the same dog kind, aren't they? That's not evolution in the molecules to man sense. It's the opposite, because you start with a big pool of information and you sorted out that information and even lost information. Now, as you look at that, again, what I'm saying to you is this. You imagine you start with this male and female here, and if you end up with dogs with, say, all big A's, big B's, big C's, say all the rest died out of the population, well, you've lost your little A's, little B's, little C's. You see that? So you've lost information. Now, not only your wild dogs, but also your domestic dogs, which are all related to the dog kind, and even the secular scientists said they all come originally from wolves. So even when you see creatures like this, which I must admit doesn't even look like a dog, but I guess it is a dog, or you see poodles, okay, or you see all these domestic varieties of dogs that we have here, people say, okay, well, how did they come about? Well, what happened here is what we call artificial selection. In other words, we get involved, man gets involved, and we determine which one breeds with which. Now, normally, domestic varieties would not form out there in the wild, and the reason is because most of them are full of mutations. Sorry about that, but they really are. For instance, my wife has a little dog, just to show you that I'm not a dog hater and I don't hate little fluffy purebred dogs. There I am holding our little dog, and her name is Minty. Doesn't she look cute? She is one of the cutest degenerate mutants you'll ever find. I mean, she's really full of all sorts of mutations. She has a mutation that causes her hair to grow. See, we like that in dogs, when their hair keeps growing, but we have to get them groomed all the time. It costs us money, doesn't it? This little dog here has certain problems. It has, well, when the weather changes, it throws up. In fact, it throws up just before the weather changes. So often we're at home sitting there, the dog throws up, we say, it's going to rain. So we have a great barometer right there in our house. We also find with our little dog, it has other problems. If you take it outside and you don't show it its way back to the door, it loses its way. It had bladder stones and it had to have an operation. That cost about $1.2 million to get the dog fixed up. Once we got it home, it sprung a leak. And so then we had to take it back to the vet, and the vet put it on estrogen, which is interesting because people say, how's your dog? My dog's on estrogen. How's your dog? You know, I mean, it's very embarrassing. And we have to spend millions of dollars keeping this thing alive. You know what really gets me? The mongrel dog down the street that's a mixture of everything in the neighborhood, can lick the slime out of the gut. He can run over them in a truck and they get up and wave and off they go. Now, what I want to show you is the difference here. You see, have a look at this diagram again. See, the original dog, more like the wolf here, is a mixture, you know, these original male and female here, a mixture of big A's, big B's, little B's, big C's, little C's. That represents the original dog, so to speak. But what we call our purebreds, what we try to do is we say, oh, here's one that has a short nose, here's one that has a short nose, and let's try to get all the genes for short nose together to get the shortest nose we can. But at the same time, our domestic varieties have mutations, like our dog, mutation that causes its hair to grow. Some have mutations that give it short legs and so on. They wouldn't survive out there in the environment normally, but what we do is we take them to the vets and we make sure they survive. And those mutations exist because of sin. But that's why your domestic varieties don't occur out there naturally, so to speak. We have to do it artificially. Now, as well as that, what we're trying to do in a purebred dog is get rid of all the variability that's there and try to get them to be what we call a particular breed. And so we really try to get them to this stage, little a, little b, little c, in a sense, analogous to that. Think about this for a moment. If you had a, little b, little c, breed with another one exactly the same, in other words, if poodle breeds with poodle, you're only going to get what? A poodle. Sad but true, okay? Whereas, if you start with these two up here, male and female, you're going to get all sorts of combinations, aren't you? But if you start with just the little A's, little B's, and little C's, there's no more combinations because you've really reduced the variability. There's no variability there. So think about this. If you started with wolves all over again, theoretically, in a sense, could you eventually, again, get poodles? And the answer is yes. But if you started with poodles and all you had were poodles, could you eventually go back to wolves? The answer is no, unless you mix them together with all the others to get back all those genes again. So, by the way, you apply that to the humankind as well, and that's a whole other area that we're not going to deal with in this session. It's the area of so-called races. If the Bible's right, we're all descendants of one man and one woman, right? Think about that. Now, why do we have different people groups? At the Tower of Babel, God gives different languages. What happens? You split up the human gene pool, just like with dogs, different combinations end up in different directions, and then what happens? Some survive better than others, and you end up with distinguishing characteristics of those different people groups. And one example I often use is skin color, because actually everyone has the same skin color. There are really no white people, there are really no black people. We have a pigment called melanin. And your big A, big B in genes in humans, talking about skin color, if you have all big A's, big B's, big C's, for the pigment called melanin, you could have a lot of melanin and be very dark. If you have all little A's, little B's, little C's in humans for skin color, for the pigment melanin, that's what it's called, then you'd have a little bit of melanin, you'd be very light. And actually, if you're in the middle with the big A, big B, big C, little c, you'd be middle brown, which the majority of the world's population are. So you can understand that at the time of the Tower of Babel, because God gave different languages, some people would end up with a mixture of the genes, be middle brown. Some would end up with all big A's, big B's, big C's, and be dark. And some would end up with little A's, little B's, little C's, and so on. I was on a radio program once, and a man called up and he said, "I'll believe that black people and white people are all descendants of Adam when you can show me 2 white people having a black baby and 2 black people having a white baby." Now, when anyone asks you that sort of thing, you should be able to come back to them and say, well, wait a minute, are 2 poodles going to have a wolf? You get the idea? Because once you've sorted out the genes and you've lost that variability, if you've got all genes for dark skin, you're not going to be able to, if you marry someone with the same sort of genes like that, with, say, all big A's, big B's, you'll never produce someone with light skin on their own. You'd have to marry someone who had some of the little A's and little B's to get that variability back. So you see, these things apply in lots of different areas. And once you understand some of this basic genetics from dogs, you can apply it in humans and understand all sorts of interesting things here. Now, over a period of time then, what I'm saying to you is, when we use the dog kind, we start with a big pool of information and all this variability. Over time, we lose variability. The pool gets smaller. You still got the pool to be a dog, and you get down to the stage where there's not that much information left. So in other words, what I'm saying is the original dog looked more like that. The original dog could not have looked like that, okay? That's a very specialized dog. From those dogs there, you could never get back to that. But from 2 of these dogs, you could eventually get that. And so to put it more succinctly and summarize it for you, we start with a jar of jelly beans representing all the original variability in dogs, okay? Not the number of genes, but the original variability in our genes. Over a period of time, you can end up with less and less information. The pool of information decreases. You can even get to the stage where there's not that much information left, and you end up with a 1 jelly bean dog, right? And of course, I don't like cats either, as you can see there. Now, in the public schools, what you'll find is students are taught, but it's not just natural selection. See, what we observe there in looking at dogs changing, the process of natural selection or adaptation, and as a Christian, as a creationist, of course, we believe in those things because we observe them happening, but it's only, what we're looking at there are processes that operate on the information that was already there. That's the opposite of evolution in the molecules to man sense, which requires new information that wasn't there that gets added into the system. So you see, you know, as you look at that, you say, how can anyone believe in molecules to man evolution? Hey, if they understand real observable science, they can't. If they really understood it, it's impossible, which means they have to believe it by blind faith. And they say, oh, but I think there is a mechanism there somewhere, but it's blind faith.